about Ukraine. I mean,
sure, yeah.
The president already spoke to this, I realize, but maybe you have a more formal response on the ceasefire that was announced by President Putin. Does the United States have a reaction to this? Could it be a good thing in some ways, or are you skeptical about things?
Well, this is really a better question for President Zelensky, and that's because, of course, it was Russia that invaded his country, that invaded Ukraine, but I can offer our perspective on this. From our perspective, there is one word that best describes that, and it's cynical. It's cynical in large part because it comes just days after Moscow perpetrated these New Year's Day attacks on Ukraine's civilian infrastructure, its civilian centers, following repeated days of attacks against similar targets. And I hesitate to even call them targets because, again, these are civilian centers in many cases. So as you can tell, we have little faith in the intentions behind this announcement. Our concern, it's a concern that you heard from Secretary Blinken in his end-of-year press conference a couple of weeks ago, is that the Russians would seek to use any temporary pause in fighting to rest, to refit, to regroup, and ultimately to reattack. And so in that sense, it can't be considered a ceasefire if the intent is to train their fire with even more vengeance, with even more ferocity, with even more lethality against the people of Ukraine. If Russia were truly serious about peace, about ending this war, it would withdraw its forces from the sovereign territory of Ukraine. That is what constitutes an end to this war. It is what we have called on Russia to do. It is what Ukrainians have called on Russia to do. It is what much of the world has called on Russia to do.
Ned, but couldn't this be taken at face value that they're actually celebrating Christmas? I mean, I remember I'm the Vietnam War generation. We used to have Christmas truce.
Saeed, I think we know better than to take anything we see or hear from Russia at face value. Unfortunately, they have given us no reason to take anything that they offer at face value. You recall the process we went through in the days and weeks leading up to February 24th, when the decision seems to have been preordained that President Putin would go in to Ukraine with the brutality that we have since seen over the course of the past 11 months. At every juncture in this war, they have given us no reason to give them even a single shred of doubt. Were they to change that? Of course we would welcome that. It's just not something we see. Andrew?
Do you have concerns that this is going to be a propaganda benefit to Vladimir Putin?
It is, of course, possible that in addition to the practical impact of this, the ability of his forces to refit, to regroup, to rest, and ultimately to reattack, that President Putin seeks to fool the world in a new and different way, that he seeks to divide public opinion, to perhaps induce the rest of the world into thinking that perhaps there's a reason to give them a shred of doubt. But there is not. When we've seen previous announced ceasefires in the past, of course, especially in the early days of this war, we heard these announcements. They were heralded by the Kremlin. They were followed by brutal strikes in places like Mariupol against fleeing civilians. Whether this so-called ceasefire over the Orthodox Christmas will hold, that, of course, is a question that only Russia knows the answer to at this point. But to us, this does not appear to be a change in the tide of the war. It does not appear to be a strategic change in Russia's plan or its approach. It appears to be a bid to continue to do what it has inflicted upon the Ukrainian people for nearly a year now, as it seeks to rest, refit, regroup, and ultimately reattack.
And have you seen any sign of willingness by Russia, back channel or otherwise, to negotiate, to sit down diplomatically?
We have not.
We have follow up on this one. When the president said he thinks that Putin was trying to find some oxygen, can you help us unpack that? Does it mean sort of an off-ramp or rest area for Putin? Do you think Putin is trying to manipulate the West, assuming that we have been playing to his games, when we announced telegraph what we were not going to do until now.
Repeat the last part of the question. I didn't-
The West has been trying to basically announce telegraphing what it was not going to do, like not sending certain weapons. Do you think Putin believes that he still can manipulate the West by sending out messages?
Well, if he believes that, he would be mistaken. And Alex, I would disagree with the premise of your question. In fact, we have told President Putin exactly what we would do at every step of the way. Prior to February 24th, we made no secret of the fact that we would do three primary things. We would provide a massive amount of security assistance to our Ukrainian partners. We have made good on that, more than $20 billion to date in security assistance alone, in addition to more than $10 billion in economic assistance, humanitarian assistance as well. We made very clear that we would hold Moscow to account with fighting sanctions, export controls, other financial and economic measures. We have made good on that. We've also said that we would shore up the NATO alliance, and that we would ensure that the NATO alliance is prepared to defend itself, including on its eastern flank. And we have made good on that. The alliance is now stronger, it is more purposeful, it is more prepared than it has been since the end of the Cold War. So we have essentially telegraphed exactly what we would do for President Putin. If he's under the misimpression that we are not a coalition, that we're not an alliance, that we're not an international community of our word, we are going to disabuse him of that.
And how do you want us to read the president's statement that he thinks Putin is trying to find some oxygen? What does that mean?
It means precisely what I said, that we believe this is a cynical ploy so that the Russians can use a bit of time, whether it is a couple days or however long it ends up being, to rest, to refit, to regroup, and ultimately to reattack. With potentially even more vengeance, even more brutality, even more lethality if they had their way.
Staying on the same topic, what do you make of the media reports when you saw Wagner leader, which is the private group, releasing prisoners and who fought in Ukraine as mercenaries? If you look at the fact what the terrorist state looks like, if this is not what it is, then how would you put that into context what we are seeing today in Russia?
We would see it as just a barbaric tactic, seeking out convicts, in many cases individuals who had been convicted of violent crimes, promising them freedom if they were to fight, and in many cases likely die on the front lines as well. There may be anecdotal examples, as you're alluding to, of individuals purportedly completing their service and receiving the pardons that they were promised. But this is a tactic that the world has condemned. It's a tactic that is extra legal. Human rights groups have been vocally critical of it for that reason as well. But it's also a tactic that will be ineffective, even if there are tens of thousands of forces who may fall under Wagner's control, under the control of Mr. Prigozhin. These are not forces that will be in a position to change the tide of the war. These are not forces that are trained. These are not forces that are generally well enmeshed in the broader Russian combat operations. And we're seeing the results of that. Despite the infusion of personnel, essentially what the Kremlin is using as cannon fodder, the Ukrainians continue to press back territory. To continue to take back territory that was taken from them since 2014, in some cases more recently since February 24th. Yeah, Nick.
Different topic.
Anything else on this?
There was something the Ukrainians said about Mr. Putin's health. They claim that he has cancer, advanced stage of cancer. Do you have any?
I don't have anything
Have
to.
you heard of this news?
I don't have anything to offer on that. No,
But you did hear the news, correct?
I've seen that report. I just don't have anything to offer on it.
Can I
Nick?
just ask one
Sure.
other thing about Ukraine? I realize might be more of a DoD question, but the announcement just with President Biden and Chancellor Schultz on the armed infantry fighting vehicles. Are you in a position to explain why this was necessary now and what the utility is of expanding to these supplies from the Ukrainians?
Sure. Sean, every decision we make when it comes to security assistance that we're providing to Ukraine is predicated on discussions we're having directly with our Ukrainian partners regarding their needs, what they need to defend themselves, based in large part on where the battle is now. And so when the battle was urban, nearly hand-to-hand combat in the earliest days, earliest hours of this, for the Battle of Kyiv, we provided a certain type of assistance. As the battle was moving to the east, to the south, to the north, we have, in the months since, provided different types of assistance. Now that we are seeing fronts emerge and intensify in various parts, including in the Donbass, where fighting has been intense, where fighting may well continue to be intense, there are certain systems, including these fighting vehicles that the Ukrainians have requested and that we deem are appropriate to provide. I expect you'll hear more details from us over the course of the next 24 hours or so about a broader package of security assistance. We have, as you know, the ability to continue providing Ukraine with security assistance through Presidential Drawdown Authority and through other programs, including the USAI, Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative that DoD administers, in large part because of the generosity of the American people and the emergency funding that Congress passed at the end of last year.
So you said it's up to President Zelensky to what to do with the announcement that Russia made, and then you also put your perspective that this is not actually something, the intention is not something that's sincere. So my question is, have you recommended Ukraine not to stop fighting, or have you recommended against any type of pause in their fight or their counteroffensive or not?
These are decisions that Ukraine will have to make. I can tell you we've been in close contact with our Ukrainian partners over the course of today. You've heard senior Ukrainian officials already offer their opinion. Unsurprisingly, the opinions that they've offered publicly are complementary to what I have just said here. I don't think there's any daylight in between how we deem, the way in which we deem the intent behind Russia's announced ceasefire. I expect you'll hear more from senior Ukrainian officials, including in the coming hours, about how they interpret this, how they intend to respond to this. But at the end of the day, I think we see this in precisely the same way.
And how do you see what are you expecting to see in order to call it a serious announcement or intention to cease the fire or to stop the fighting?
Well, there would be one way to demonstrate that Russia was serious about ending this war. That would be to withdraw its forces from Ukraine. Short of that, there are other ways to demonstrate that Russia is perhaps serious about peace, or as part of the process, serious about dialogue and diplomacy in getting towards that ultimate peace. We haven't seen anything yet to indicate that Russia is serious. In fact, at every juncture, we've seen quite the opposite. The most jarring example, and I've gone back to this a few times already, is the split screen we saw between President Zelensky when he was offering his vision for a just peace to the assembled leaders of the G20 last November in Bali, while within Ukraine, on the other side of the screen, we saw images of missiles and bombs and carnage raining down on the people of Ukraine. If Russia wanted to signal, even subtly, that it was serious about changing its strategic approach, there are ways it could do that.
How do you see the role of the Turkish president in all of this? He made calls today with Russian counterpart and also with President Zelensky. How do you see the mediation efforts by Turkey?
Well, we greatly appreciate the constructive role that Turkey has played in trying to bring about an end to this barbaric war. We appreciate Turkey's steadfast commitment to Ukraine's territorial integrity and its efforts to foster dialogue between Ukraine and Russia. Of course, it is President Putin that will need to heed calls from President Erdogan and numerous other counterparts around the world to end this senseless war. We've said time and again, and this gets back to your colleague's question, that actions ultimately will speak louder than words. We're going to judge what Russia does based on its actions. no one wants this war to end more than the Ukrainians. And the fact is that Russia remains the sole obstacle to peace in Ukraine. And President Putin, time and again, has demonstrated that he has absolutely no meaningful intent in genuine diplomacy.
Just clarify, what side do you think is Turkey really on?
Turkey has been a constructive player in this. It has been a constructive player in attempting to foster dialogue, meaningful diplomacy. Separate and apart from President Erdogan's recent calls, discussions with President Putin and President Zelensky of Ukraine, of course, we can go back to over the summer when Turkey was a driving force, along with the UN Secretary General, for the renewal, first of all, the creation and ultimately the renewal of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Without the role that Turkey played, that mechanism may not have been renewed. And as a result, it's a mechanism that has provided tons of grain to, in many cases, the world's neediest. Throughout this conflict, Turkey has attempted to use its relations with Ukraine and with Russia, in addition to its positioning as a member of NATO and its good relations with the international community, to further the prospects for peace. Ultimately, it is not a failure on the part of Ankara. It is the unwillingness on the part of Moscow to heed Turkey's calls, to heed the calls of the broader international community.